Are you a fan of 1970s sci-fi movies? Well, I am. So this week we're going to talk about the 1971 movie, The Omega Man. This movie is one of the movies based on Richard Matheson's novel, I Am Legend, which you might be more familiar with the Will Smith version of this movie, but Omega Man and that are based on the same novel. So is like a 1960s Vincent Price movie. The Vincent Price movie was called The Last Man on Earth, and it came out in 1964. It was also an inspiration for George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. It stars Charlton Heston as Dr. Robert Neville in one of his many 1970s sci-fi movies. And in the Omega Man version, there is a biological catastrophe that creates like a gang of homicidal mutants. He developed a serum or an experimental vaccine that he took, and it has made him immune to it. And for a while, he believes he is the only living human being on Earth. He's going a little mad. It takes place in what was the future of 1976. The original novel was written in 1954, so it was over 20 years in the future when the novel came out. But 1976 is, of course, way in the past now. He, of course, goes on to discover that he is actually not alone. He is not even the only man alive on Earth. I think the tagline of the movie was, "The last man alive is not alone," something like that. This also stars Anthony Zerbe as Mateus, Rosalind Cash as Lisa, and Paul Koslo as Dutch. I mean, this is a fun movie to watch, and it has some good things in it. But when it came out, it was largely released to mixed reviews, like a lot of the sci-fi movies of that time. A lot of mixed reviews. They were very polarizing. You either love them or you hate them. There was no accounting for how fun they were to watch, which I think I like a really good movie as much as the next person, but there's something to be said for just a fun watch too. Director Tim Burton has said that this is one of his favorite films, and if he were stuck alone on a desert island, this is the movie that he would bring with him, largely because it's somebody for him to sympathize with who is in the same boat as him, basically, if he were alone on a desert island. And a lot of the people that acted with Charlton Heston during this time in his career, they were younger than he was, and they had grown up with him as Ben-Hur and Moses and all of his big roles, so it was a little bit intimidating for them to act with him. Rosalind Cash said it blew her mind kissing Moses. And when he realized this, he actually changed his approach to how he would interact with them or play the rules with him, or in between scenes just talking to them, because he realized that they were a little bit intimidated by him. And a little bit of trivia for you is, if you're a fan of the show Mystery Science Theater 3000, that show was actually inspired by a scene in The Omega Man where Charlton Heston is sitting in a movie theater alone watching the Woodstock film. That inspired Joel Hodgson's in 1988 to create Mystery Science Theater 3000. And if you guys are ever wondering what author Richard Matheson thinks of these adaptations of his book I Am Legend, he is not really a fan of them, and this one is no exception. He didn't really like this movie, but wasn't as bothered by this one as the Vincent Price version. He really disliked this one, but he was able to separate this one more because he said this one had changed so much from the book. It was like it wasn't even the same material. And there are some remarkable scenes in this movie when you think about the time that it was. There are scenes where you have full-on abandoned city streets, and this was in the 1970s. So when you see that in the movies that happened before CGI, it makes you wonder how they did that, and I'll tell you what they did. So that is downtown Los Angeles on a Sunday morning in 1970. It usually was so deserted that they found out that they could easily shoot scenes of a deserted cityscape on Sunday mornings in downtown Los Angeles and get away with it. I think if you look in the background and are really focusing, you can slightly see some people and some cars in the far distance, but they really do pull that off, and it's not a backlot. It's actual city streets in the city of Los Angeles. But this was also filmed on the Warner Brothers ranch. His apartment building was on the famed Warner Brothers ranch, which sat in the middle of Burbank. Sadly, that has recently been torn down. But up until, I think, early this year or last year, before they turned it down, the apartment building was still back there, along with all these other movie sets that were filmed back there that sadly no longer exist anymore. But also, the Friends Fountain was right in front of the buildings that made up where his apartment was. And so in the beginning of Friends, when they're in the fountain, you see the buildings in the background. That's actually the streetscape of where his apartment was in the Omega Man. And Charlton Heston is the person that made this movie happen. He actually read the novel on a flight coming back to Los Angeles, and he was very interested in making it into a movie, and he actually wasn't aware that it had been adapted before, with The Last Man on Earth, with Vincent Price playing the lead role. So it was wrongly thought for a long time that this movie was the first movie to feature an interracial kiss, but that of course is not true. Island in the Sun in 1957 had an interracial kiss. A Patch of Blue in 1965 had an interracial kiss. And closer to the making of this movie, you had Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with interracial kissing. It was a groundbreaking thing nonetheless, because it didn't happen that much. And Charlton Heston actually originally wanted Orson Welles to direct this, but Orson Welles, of course, turned that down. Or I wonder what Orson Welles' version of this movie would look like. But it goes on to be directed by Boris Sagal, who wasn't a huge director. His Ukrainian born back when it was part of the USSR, who had at this point directed a lot of TV movies and went on after this to largely direct a lot of TV movies. He was actually killed by a helicopter accident on the set. It was a TV miniseries called World War III that came out in 1982. Charlton Heston has said in his biography that the director had quite a temper and lost his temper several times on the set of this movie. And speaking of other things that the Omega Man inspired in pop culture, if you're familiar with The Simpsons and their Treehouse of Horror series, in the 8th Treehouse of Horror special in 1997, there is actually an homage to this movie with one of the segments called the Omega Man, which has this basic story happening to Homer Simpson in Springfield. So if you're a fan of sci-fi movies, if you're a fan of zombie movies even, you should give Omega Man a try. If you're anything like me and have a a soft spot for 70s sci-fi movies, and by chance you haven't seen Omega Man, you should definitely watch it. It is a fun watch, and there's something to be said for just a fun movie to watch. And thank you all for joining me. My name is Stacia, and I just like to talk about movies here in my little corner of the internet, and I enjoy you watching with me. If you'd like to, please subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to get to 500 subscribers, and I would love you to help me with that goal. And you can do that by, of course, subscribing, but if you like, if you comment, if you share this with people, that also helps too. But I love you all for watching. Bye. See you next time.